You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dummler, Broncos country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Head on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I am Nicholas Kendell. Carl Dummler will not be joining us today, so I have my good friend and colleague way up there in Alaska, Erick Trickel. Eric, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. Just hating the weather right now. We got a big dumping of snow about a week ago, and now it's raining, and all the snow is melting.
Yeah, that's not what you want. You definitely want it to stick around there. You're definitely a jolly dude, right? Am I correct in understanding that you're Christmas or bust?
Yeah, very much a very Christmas guy. I mean, we have our tree up, we have our ceiling covered in lights, we have most of the presents wrapped, we have all that stuff. We're already all ready for Christmas. I love it, and I want snow on the ground for Christmas. It's got to be a white Christmas.
Yeah, you think in Alaska that would be a white Christmas would be almost guaranteed. You probably have more Christmases with snow than without.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, my family, specifically my dad, and now the wife, she's also pretty Christmas crazy, but my dad goes 110%. My house, my parents' house, ceiling to floor, outside lights. I mean, it's incredible. The whole basement is pretty much Christmas storage. So, that's I enjoy it. It's fun to come back to that, but man, that is I don't know if I could ever get to that level of just being totally Christmased out. I think, named me Nicholas after Saint Nick. So that's my homage to the holiday. So, all right. Well, make sure you guys follow us on Twitter at Erick Trickel and at Nick Kendell MHH. You can follow the podcast Twitter account at BTB Football Pod. Make sure you just subscribe to the show and leave us a rating, as we value your input on our show. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and even that of YouTube. Also, make sure you head on over to milehighhuddle.com, a new affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. This podcast is powered by Overtime Media.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Alrighty, and we are back on the Building the Broncos podcast. And Eric, man, does it feel good. The Broncos have back-to-back wins. This is the second time this season the Broncos have had back-to-back wins, but this team feels like it's going in the right direction for the first time in many moons. And that probably starts, obviously some good young players across the roster, but when that quarterback, and you have a young quarterback with requisite tools and making splash plays, gosh, it's just so much more fun to watch.
It is. And what makes it even better is when everything is clicking. Like, it wasn't just the players on the field were executing. It wasn't just the play calling. It was all working together and working cohesively. Yes, there are still some issues in the second half, but this is a young team. They're still trying to get to that next level where they can go a full 4 quarters. But, man, that first half against the Texans was super exciting, and this was probably the best offensive display that we've seen since, week 2 or 3 of the 2016 NFL season from the Broncos anyways.
It feels like years since the Broncos had put up over 24 points in a game, and they had 31 points after the first half. Now, granted, a little bit of game flow stuff going on there. The Broncos had a defensive turnover for a touchdown early, but goodness, the offense was moving the ball up and down the field, explosive pass plays, and just all cylinders. So it was beautiful to watch, and you're kind of starting to get an idea of the potential of this team. Now, you know me, I got to bring it back a little bit. Texans, they definitely had a chance to have this be a trap game coming off that big win against New England. But, when you get beat like that and the Broncos put in an offensive output like they did, it's not that much of a fluke. You can't really say it's that much of a fluke. It's not like, the Broncos were, had won over the turnover battle by 5. That's not the case. They had the turnover battle by 2, but Texans, I think the Texans finished with more total yards, and the time of possession was pretty close. So it just felt like a very thorough, all-around victory.
Yeah, it did. And with it being a trap game, I do think the Texans overlooked the Broncos a little bit, but that doesn't fully explain that the Broncos came out and the changes that we saw from the Broncos. The biggest one for me was Rich Scangarello and his play calling, and I've been harsh on him over the last few months with his play calling, and the biggest reason has been the lack of aggression, especially in the second half. And against the Texans, he kept the foot on the pedal basically for the whole game. And in that second half, it became more of an execution problem instead of Rick Scangarello calling plays that were holding the offense back. So trap game or not, there was still so many positives from this Broncos team that just makes you super excited.
Yeah, so let's get right into this now. The stock report. My first guy for the stock report has to be Noah Fant. We found out that the Broncos rookie tight end, he suffered a hip and a foot injury or ankle injury, but he should be good to go. But that's worth monitoring going forward. But he had a great game, probably one of his best performances to date. 113 yards, 4 receptions on just 4 targets as well. And none of the plays were really that acrobatic as far as the catches he made, some good scheming open, but there's going to be times where he's not going to look the most graceful, kind of like a new baby horse or a deer out there, but when he's 6'5", 250, 6'4", 250 running that 4.5 40 in the open field, he's a hoss to bring down, and that is just truly remarkable. I mean, those big plays that he had, the long of, I think it was 44 yards, that's an okay play, and for many tight ends, you guys make that catch, and you're happy about it. He gets tackled right there. Not Noah Fant, with the athleticism, the explosiveness he can bring after the catch, anything like that, any just given play can be an explosive play for the passing offense, and that just has me so excited because the potential is through the roof as we see not only in the offense, but Noah Fant in general.
Yeah, and with Noah Fant, he's on pace for 43 catches and 606 yards. Like, that's just an outstanding pace for a rookie tight end. And if he is able to maintain it, he's just the 4th rookie tight end in NFL history to have 40 catches and 600-plus yards and more than 13 yards a catch. So, he's showing definitely why the Broncos wanted him, why they valued him so highly, and basically that why he is such a focal point of this offense. But for me, the guy that has stock up is another tight end in Jeff Heuerman. Now, he didn't make the splash plays like Noah Fant did, but he did a lot of the dirty work as a blocker. And part of this is me eating crow with Jeff Heuerman because I was really down on him, especially the new contract he signed, even though it wasn't for a lot of money. He was just always a jag to me, just another guy. So I just didn't see the value in bringing him back at that contract. I think that going younger, somebody who didn't have the injury history like Jeff Heuerman did, was definitely a better way. But if he is able to play like he did against the Texans, be that reliable blocker, be that pass catcher when called upon, then Denver could potentially have a good tight end duo with Fant and Heuerman, because Heuerman brings what Fant doesn't in the terms of a blocker. Somebody that, again, they can rely on as a blocker, and that's what this Broncos offense really needs, because when they weren't getting the blocking from the tight end position, you can definitely see that the whole offense struggles a lot more.
Yeah, definitely. They need a Y tight end that can be an inline player that can complement well with Noah Fant. Noah Fant probably never going to be a great blocker. Obviously, we hope that he can get better there. Not the case this season, but even then, how many times do you want him being a guy who's going to be held back and, kept in line to block? You want that athlete in space in the pass game. That's why you brought him in. So having a guy like Heuerman, still only 27 years old, in his, I believe his 5th year in the league this year, and we definitely differed on the contract this past season. I thought that it was such a small and team-friendly contract, especially with the game bonuses that the per game active bonus that he had in there. I didn't feel like it was that much of a risky contract, and the Broncos could get out of it after this season too. Only $500,000 dead cap, could save about $3.66 million, I believe, if they got out of it. But again, it really comes down more to availability than anything else with Jeff Heuerman. But overall, I like that, and I really love the usage of the tight ends in this offense against the Texans. I mean, not only did you see Noah Fant, obviously, and Jeff Heuerman, but Andrew Beck, that tight end, fullback, hybrid type there. So it's really fun to see that, and keeping the Texans in base and then really just victimizing those linebackers in space in the pass game. It was a sight to behold, and probably one of the better schemed matches we've seen executed so far this season from the offense. So I really love the 12 personnel. I've always been about that. It's probably the Iowan in me being biased, because Iowa, if you can get more tight ends on the field, typically the better. But that's the way I like it. And Heuerman and Fant, you can do worse than that next season. They might maybe bring in another tight end, not the best draft class, but maybe somebody in free agency to compete with Heuerman, but you can do worse than that. So actually, we're doing 4 stock ups today and only 1 stock down because it was such a good game. So stock up again here for me. This one's kind of I don't want to say it's a sarcastic clap or anything, but a little bit of a golf clap, so to speak. Juwan James finally getting out there. Broncos looking really solid with him out there. The offense, that you could obviously see a big step back from Juwan James to Elijah Wilkinson, specifically in the pass game. At least I could in my 2 viewings of the game. And James looks solid out there. He's not the best guy at the point of attack in the rushing game, which I kind of saw in that first half too, but just getting him out there, that right tackle spot, a little bit better solidified with a better player than Wilkinson. Hats off to Wilkinson for going out there and being available and doing what this team asked of him, even though I don't think he was physically up to the task. But getting Juwan James out there, it's really good to see, and I think that getting him out there next week for the full game and hopefully, next season as well, for the rest of this season, but next season as well, can really have a big impact on the offensive line, because Wilkinson has been, again, admirable as it's been, he's been an issue on this offensive line, specifically early in the season, not as much lately, but Juwan James, he could literally turn that right tackle spot into a plus. They brought him in for a reason, good athlete, still young. Toughness questions, getting out there questions, that's what it comes down to, but seeing him out there, seeing him move around, seeing him not get injured again, not get dinged up again, has me definitely on the stock up list for Juwan James.
Yeah, and one thing with Elijah Wilkinson is he's just a guard playing tackle. And so there's a lot of issues there. He's a little bit of a lumbered mover, and he's a little bit slow on his kick slide, and more athletic ends are able to get around him because he's just not quick enough for the tackle position. Having Juwan James out there was definitely a boost. And that first half offensive line that we saw from the Broncos, probably the best overall game as a whole offensive line unit that we've seen in quite some time. And my second stop-up guy is another player on that offensive line. That's Austin Schlottman. And the big reason for that is I actually think that the interior, just talking about Dalton Reiser, McGovern, and Schlottman, is they looked better than they ever did with Ron Leary out there. And it sucks to say because a concussion's not a joking matter or anything like that. And I hope that Ron Leary gets healthy, but his time in Denver's done. And maybe this guy can step in and compete for a starting job, but at the very least, he's getting some valuable experience that can translate to being a continued long-term backup for this Broncos offensive line, because they need to improve their depth. And who knows, maybe after the season, because he is a center and a guard hybrid, maybe they decide to give him a try at center, where he, to me anyways, is a much better fit than guard.
Yeah, I thought Schlottman was in there doing okay for what they were asked. I did think that he was having some issues at the point of attack in the run game. Not really his best skill set. Probably, what is he, 6'6", 305. He's not built like a power guy at the point of attack. Maybe even a better center in the long term. But seeing him out there, I thought he did adequately.
Yeah, he's not the type of lineman that's gonna move guys on his own. But what he was able to do was he was able to use defensive linemen's momentum against them and get them turned out of the hole. And there were multiple runs where we saw that. And actually, I'm highlighting Schlottman in a film piece that's going to show that even though he doesn't have the power or the strength to hold up with some of these guys, it's the smarts and the ability to just use their momentum, their strength, and their weight against them, because he won multiple reps just by doing that.
Yeah, definitely. So getting now to stock down, unfortunately for me, I had a hard time finding a stock down in this one, but I went with Mike Purcell and specifically the interior run defense. The Broncos, overall, I think I was definitely nervous coming into this game losing Derek Wolfe, because he's been such just a huge part of this interior defensive line this season, and I thought that the Texans might have an advantage in the ground game if it came down to it, and luckily for the Broncos, the game flow made it so the Texans' run game couldn't really be something that they leaned on as much, because they had to get some explosive plays to cut into the lead. But 134 rushing yards, 6.1 yards per carry for the Texans in a game where they were down a lot early. That's a concern for me, and I thought Purcell, not the best. I think he's more of a jag than probably a difference maker. But he and that, and specifically the interior rush defense, some of them had some solid statistics, but I just thought that they were giving up way too much in that ground game, and that's a concern for me going forward.
Yeah, they were definitely bullied a little bit by the interior offensive line of the Texans, especially early on the game. Yeah. Once you got to that second half, Denver was up by so much, it took the running game out of the basically out of the playbook as it is, because Texans had to get back up and score quickly. Mike Purcell, I agree with you. He's just a jag. He's not a guy. He's not a difference maker on there. Even though he did make a huge difference for the run defense, there's just nothing he really offers as a pass rusher. So if he gets caught out there in passing downs, then you're going to be lacking a pass rush. And I too was concerned about Derek Wolfe, and Draymond Jones getting hurt made me even more concerned. But my guy that stock down is kind of a similar reason as Todd Davis. And he did lead the team in tackles, but there were multiple times against the run where he was just filling the wrong lane. He was just reading the play wrong, getting caught up on blockers. And then the Texans, and this is no fault of his own, it's just the scheme and the matchups that the Texans were able to get. But there was a couple times where they exploited him in coverage just because they got him in bad positioning against a tougher matchup like a wide receiver or stuff like that, and they just exploited that. So it's not really any fault of Todd Davis's. It's just the Texans just know the weakness. They did the film, and they just found ways to exploit that.
Yeah, definitely, that's a good call. He did pretty good cleaning up, and I think that if it's between the tackles, Todd Davis is one of the better ones in the league. But when he has his tasks to play in space, whether that be coverage or in pursuit, just sometimes you wish he just had a little bit more gear. But you can definitely do worse than Todd Davis at linebacker. So stock up here for me. And this one, he didn't have the best statistical game or anything like that. But I wrote an article earlier this week that the Broncos probably would be wise to shut down Von Miller. Playoffs aren't happening this season. He had a sprained MCL. Anything out there that would potentially hurt him in the future or anything like that just has me scared, especially for a guy who's going to be 30-31 next season. So Von Miller, stock up for me, just because you could tell he wasn't 100%. You could see that when he in his gait, getting after the guy. I think they maybe even switched him over the right tackle to the left tackle because of that knee. But Von Miller, he could easily have checked out this season. I got an injury now, playoffs out of hope, blah blah blah. You know what? I'm gonna rest up and get ready for next year. I have no issue with that. This dude wants to be out there. This dude is playing hyped up football. He is loving the action. I mean, in the post game victory stuff, you see him. He's got a big old smile on his face behind Vic Fangio running around. I mean, he loves it. And this guy, some people talk about wanting to trade him. There's maybe some merit to the discussion at some point, to some varying degree. But Von Miller, I think he's just such an important piece for this team. And with Drew Lock and the offense kind of giving them the defense some life, giving them the defense some hope, so to speak, I think that Von Miller, stock up, excited to be here. And I love the team attitude and very much in the moment enjoying things, despite how easy it would have been to check out and be down in the dumps after this season.
Yeah, and with Von Miller, I think one thing that can't be undersold with his game is that Laramie Tunsil had 3 false starts when Von Miller was lined up against him. I don't know how many snaps he played on that side of the line, but Von Miller definitely was inside the head of Tunsil, and it definitely was reflected because Tunsil was trying to jump early and get into position because Von Miller is so dangerous. His year has been down, but it hasn't been a terrible year by any means. My other stock up guy is Kareem Jackson, and how could he not be? I mean, he was just kind of floating by. He was doing good things for the Broncos defense, don't get me wrong, but he just wasn't making those big name plays that were kind of hyped up that we were going to be getting with him when the Broncos first brought him in. And we finally got those. I mean, not just from him, but Jeremiah Tauchu and handing off that fumble to him and him running for that touchdown, the heads-up play for the interception. He was flying all over the field. He made some big stops in short yard situations, came up and laid out DeAndre Hopkins. He just did so much for this Broncos defense and in his homecoming, basically, since he spent so long in Houston. How can he not be a stock-up guy? I mean, he was my MVP for the game because he was just outstanding, and it was great to see exactly why the Denver Broncos valued him so highly.
Yeah, I definitely, when I was doing this outline, I was hoping that you would have him on there because he deserved a shout-out. I mean, who would have thunk, besides Philip Lindsay, that you would get this level of thump from Kareem Jackson moving to safety? I know he's always been a solid tackler, but that moving to safety is a little bit different. He doesn't really have that prototypical thumper stature, but he comes down and granted, had a lot to play for this week, extra motivation, and he showed it. But goodness, I mean, I'm surprised DeAndre Hopkins got back up after that one hit. It was clean. clean, but he's just bringing so much energy and versatility. And Vic Fangio said today, he's still, not 100% comfortable with what he's seeing as safety. Still got some areas to improve upon there. Classic Vic Fangio. Yeah, he's he's one of those guys that just never really gonna pump too much gas up anybody's rear end, if so to speak. But I love that about Vic. But Kareem Jackson, heck of a game. Stock up, 110% for me. Last one here for me, stock up. Kind of stock up. Shelby Harris leads the league in batted balls, and I thought he did a pretty good job with some pass rush output. And again, the interior defensive line for run defense was a concern, but I thought he had a solid game of impacting the pass game and somewhat stepping up for the loss of Derek Wolfe. And I'm just getting the hands up in the pass game. That's something I wish that more defensive linemen would do, and he's been great at that this season. So I haven't been the biggest Shelby Harris, standing on the box and singing his praises this season, but I think he was solid in this game, been solid this season, and deserved at least a little shout out here.
I think this was his best game as a pass rusher. In a way, I mean, he did have that 3-sack showing against Minnesota, and in this game he was credited with 5 hurries, but he did more than just that. He was able to get some decent pressure. I think that his run defense was really lackluster, and I think that's been a big issue with me and his game all year long, is that's what he's really been trying to do, or been asked to do anyways, and just hasn't been doing it well. But my last stock up guy is Isaac Yiadom, and I really went back and forth here. I mean, Jeremiah Tauchu, he's definitely worthy of it. I think Drew Lock, of course, he should definitely be worthy of it. There's just so many players here that I was trying to figure out who to go with. And Isaac Yiadom, he catches my attention. I mean, his run defense is still improving. I did a film piece highlighting it from his game last week against the Chargers. But his playing coverage was actually really good, too. He's trusting his eyes a little bit more. There's still, it's not perfect. I'm not saying he's been some great covered corner or a great corner overall. We're just seeing a very different corner in Isaac Yiadom than we saw at the beginning of the season, and a very much improved corner. Maybe it's showing signs that there is still maybe some hope there that he can develop and potentially be a good number 3, number 4 option for the Denver Broncos going forward.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And, that's one of the positions that they don't really have a young stud that they can hang their hat on and be excited about going forward. So even if Yiadom just ends up a cornerback 3 for being a compensatory 3rd-round pick, there's value to that. And I'm pulling for him. Obviously, there was Devontae Harris getting some run there for a little bit when Isaac Yiadom was struggling. And Yiadom's still not playing, perfect ball out there, but he's definitely improved his stock upon the beginning of the season and is showing tape that warrants, being a guy who you can pencil in on this depth chart next year. Now, where at? That remains to be seen, but he's definitely making a strong statement as far as, hey, I'm still here, I'm physical. I think there was one play he came down and was really good. He's doing a much better job rallying to the football, and he's always been a long and physical corner, so that you love to see that because that's how he would best fit in this scheme. That's the best projection to him in this scheme. But
yeah,
go ahead.
And just to highlight that, Isaac Yiadom did allow all 5 of his targets to be caught, but he held them to only 32 yards, 13 of which were after the catch. That's limiting the impact of receivers. Do we wish that he wasn't allowing every single target to be caught? Of course we do. But if they're going to be caught, then you got to come up and make the stop. And that's exactly what he was doing, is they were throwing it underneath and forcing him to come up and make the stop, which is something he had issues with earlier on in the season.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And that's partly the players of the secondary and the cornerbacks. The Broncos cornerbacks group this season is probably as least talented as it's been since, probably 2010, around there. But that's also a big part of the Vic Fangio defenses. It's okay to give up those yards, the quick passes. However, everybody rallies the football, and we tackle them immediately upon that. The Broncos, one of the teams giving up, I think they're the lowest depth of target of any team in football this season. That's just a big part of the scheme, keeping everything in front of you. It's why tackling is non-debatable for players in this defense. If you don't tackle, you're not getting on the field. So big part of it. So, all right, we're going to take a break here. Don't go anywhere. We got to come back and keep recapping this Broncos huge victory. 2019, not the best season, a 5-8 team, but a 38-24 victory on the road over the AFC South leading Texans with the new quarterback and everything. It's really, gosh, it's so exciting to be here covering the Broncos team again. It feels like a weight has been lifted. The clouds have parted, and God, you can hear the angelic choir in the background, but don't go anywhere. We're going to come back to this angelic choir. We'll be right back.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Alrighty, and we are back on the Building the Broncos podcast. I am Nick Kendell. Carl Dummler is not here today, so I have my good friend and colleague Erick Trickel. We are breaking down the Broncos versus Texans game and have the stats here in front of us now. Just going to talk about this game a little bit. And the biggest thing for me is the Broncos, you talked about a little bit, but this really felt like a tendency breaker game. A lot of people made a fair amount about Romeo Crennel, this Texans defense coming in here, Drew Lock. This is a game where he's going to got, especially if Scangarello still has the training wheels on this offense. And make no mistake, there were still some training wheels wise as far as the reads and whatnot. They're trying to make it as easy for Drew Lock as possible. They're not asking him to run a Peyton Manning offense out there. But I loved it. I mean, he came out, he was fantastic in play action, and they hit. It was obvious early on. Courtland Sutton, the Texans' plan was Courtland Sutton's not beating us, and the Broncos distributed the ball. I mean, 10 different receivers, I think, touched the football in the first half. Insane. So I guess quick takeaways from the game.
Yeah, one quick takeaway for me is just seeing, as I kind of talked about it earlier, and that is being aggressive. I mean, I don't want to beat a dead horse or anything like that, but there's a huge difference with the energy of the team. Just watching your offensive play caller calling plays to be more aggressive compared to being just lackadaisical about it all and just being content with having good field position and settling for a field goal. We didn't see that, and that makes me so happy. If Rick Scangarello turns out being a great offensive coordinator, I will happily eat crow. I mean, obviously, as an analyst, all we can do is we can only go off of the information we have at hand. And at the time, the information we had at hand with Rick Scangarello just wasn't good. But yeah, just having this young quarterback in Drew Lock, letting him do things that fit him and that he can do very well is just changing the whole offense. I mean, you can see it. This is probably the game where we saw the most energy from everybody on offense all season and probably for a few years. Probably ever since the Chargers game with Peyton Manning when he came back in. The offense has just been a little bit dead. I mean, Joe Flacco, he wasn't that leader to rally him. Brandon Allen, we saw a little bit more energy there, but not to this level. And so it's just being aggressive, keeping that energy, because there's just something weird that players, when they're highly energetic and happy and enjoying the game, they tend to play a little bit better. And I think that's one thing that we were able to see against the Texans.
I have been sitting on this one. I've been afraid to put it in writing or even tell it to you guys. So what a better spot to talk about it than right here in the podcast where nobody will hold me accountable besides you. But and Chad maybe too. But this is kind of an old hat reference here. Not super old, but a generation gap maybe for some guys. But Drew Lock, I'm not comparing the overall tools, especially not the arm talent to it. But there's just kind of an aura, an energy that this offense has. It's happy-go-lucky. It's fun. It's a little bit gunslinger, living on the edge from time to time, but you're still going to get that. And it's just the joy that you're getting from it that not a player comparison one for one, but just kind of the feel that I get from Drew Lock's leadership and who he is. Doesn't it kind of feel like Brett Favre?
Yes, and actually, sorry, it's funny that you mentioned that because the whole time you were talking, I was sitting there thinking to myself, okay, he's going to say Brett Favre. He's going to say Brett Favre. I know this is coming. You're going to say Brett Favre. Now, prior to the draft, I think I mentioned it to you that one of my kind of stylistic energy and just how he handles himself, one of my comparisons in that was Brett Favre with Drew Lock. Is they are very similar in those regards. Does that mean their careers are going to be the same? No, but just that aspect of Drew Lock's game is very reminiscent of Brett Favre.
It's just like a boyish, innocent joy that comes from it. Like the little wrist launcher laser thing that he's doing, having fun with the offensive linemen. It's not always the most orthodox. There's times when he should be probably setting his feet and delivering it, and he's adding a little bit of, flair to it, so to speak. But there's just, it's they're gallivanting around out there, and it's just so loose and fun. And you can tell those guys out there, they're living in that moment and trying to enjoy that game and making the most of it. And it's just, it's a different energy. It's not as methodical or tedious. And the guys are rallying around this, and belief is a powerful thing, man. Belief is a powerful thing. And it does seem like not only obviously going to have to convince the fan base, the front office, everything like that, but this locker room is buying into it. And I can't, I'm glad that you kind of didn't slam me there or spike the ball on me, but it just kind of has a feeling of a young Brett Favre-led Packers team. Now, granted, Brett Favre had a better arm. Drew Lock's arm is good. I'd give it probably an A- versus NFL starters. I mean, it's probably one of the top 10 arms in terms of velocity in the NFL, definitely among the starters, but I wouldn't compare him to Brett Favre's arm. Hopefully he won't throw the interceptions like Favre. However, there's a little bit of a nuance and kind of throwing up some YOLO balls from time to time where you could see that happening. I wouldn't be surprised if we had a game where Drew Lock got us behind very early, very quickly with some bad interceptions, just because that's kind of the looseness of the game that he has sometimes. But I don't know. It's the energy, it's the feeling, the offensive lineman even joking with him. It's so much fun, and it's bringing joy not only back to this team, but back to the city.
Yeah, another thing, just talking about the joy that we're having and everything, it's like that kid on Christmas that opens up that one gift that they wanted all year long, that they've been waiting for, didn't know they were getting it, and it's there, and they sit there and they just love it, and for the next few months, next few weeks, however long, they're just doing nothing but playing with that one toy. It's the joy that we're seeing from Drew Lock and enjoying the moment and everything is not just Brett Favre level, but it reminds me of that. That's another aspect. When watch him do the whole Buzz Lightyear laser thing on the screen the other day, that's just what made me think of it. It reminded, and this is going to be a little bit probably weird to say or anything like that, but one reason why it made me think that is because it reminded me of how I felt when I was doing something that I really enjoyed to do. And the joy and the happiness that brought me, because you can just see it on him, and not just see it, you could kind of feel it. Like, if that makes any sense, even though I'm in Alaska and they're in Denver, I could kind of feel that joy that he was having by just watching them. And you talked about it earlier, but man, it was such a joy to watch that game against the Texans. And that is a big reason why watching this kid just enjoy the moment and live in the moment it's just something special.
Yeah, and I did actually look up on Twitter right now to see if there was anybody who made that comparison, and nobody made it the energy-wise, but Les Shapiro did say that some of the stylistically stuff is like a young Brett Favre with a confident arm, throwing off balance, dropping his arm at times, and running around. So definitely something that I get it more the energy-wise. Brett Favre had a different level arm than Locke has. There's a reason Favre is in the Hall of Fame, but something to talk about. And I guess let's just keep it on Locke here. I have some interesting stats from Locke from this game. Brett Kane from at Brett Kane Radio pointed out today. So the big money makers for NFL quarterbacks, any quarterback, but NFL quarterbacks, is third down conversions as well as in the red zone. And in the red zone, Brett Kane pointed out the Broncos have had issues in the red zone for years, but Drew Lock in the red zone in 2 starts, 11 for 13, 63 yards, and 4 touchdowns, which is, gosh, that's just night or day difference. I mean, wasn't it just when Garrett Bowles had that, I wouldn't call it ticky-tacky, but the block in the back foul, which I was confused about when it happened. I mean, you typically
that was a very obvious block in the back, man.
Yeah, but I can't remember the last time I've seen that called on offense.
My thing with that is just the impact that it had on the play. I think that was one reason why they kind of threw the flag on it.
Yeah,
is because without him doing that, that's not a touchdown. Yeah. So it kind of forced the flag to be thrown. But it was a very obvious block in the back. I mean, he just shoves the guy right in the back. It's Texas.
Yeah. Well, getting back to the point, typically, it's 2nd and 18 there, whatever it is. And, oh man, there goes the Broncos' chance at a touchdown. It's going to end up being a field goal now. And, you had this good movement here, all this yards, and it's been so hard to get in the end zone anyway. But now it's going to be, instead of 7, it's going to be 3. Drew Lock throws a full-on trusting his arm ball, and Noah Fant comes up with a great contested catch. And, we're off to the races. So great to see that. Also, the other one I talked about here is third down. Drew Lock on third down so far this season is 15 for 18, which is 83.3% for 182 yards and 4 touchdowns and a 148.4 passer rating. And 61%, 11 of those 18 pass attempts have resulted in either a touchdown or a first down, which is, gosh, I mean, what a difference. What a difference. And there's still some consistency issues out there, but he did not leave throws on the field like I thought we saw in his first game. I think Fangio stated as such as well. So really awesome to see those things. So I guess bringing it back to Lock here, this is the Lock segment today. What are you looking for going forward over these last 3 games? I mean, obviously Lock has improved one week to the next. I'm guessing he's not going to play as good at Arrowhead as he did at Houston for multiple reasons, but let's be completely honest. If Lock played the game like Houston every single week, he would be legitimately in the MVP conversation, and I don't think that is probably fair to put him up on that pedestal just yet after 2 games. But what are we looking forward to over the last 3 games for Lock, and specifically in this offense?
I want to see a lot of more of the same thing in some ways. I want to see the confidence. I want to see them taking shots downfield. I want to see the aggressiveness from not just the players on the field, but with the play calling. But I want to see him just kind of just make a little bit better reads every now and then. I mean, his 2 interceptions that he has this year, both of them were really bad reads. I mean, one of them, I guess the one against Houston, you can argue a little bit that the throw wasn't all there and it just was kind of fluttered and I think he was getting hit as he threw the ball on that one too. So there's definitely some issues there. I'd like to see him call out blitzers a little bit more. There's been an issue with that. And setting his feet. I mean, he does such a great job throwing off balance, throwing off weird platforms, that it makes me hard, because that whole saying you don't fix what's not broken, or whatever it is. Like, yeah, don't fix what's broken. Don't fix
if it ain't broken. If it ain't broke,
don't fix it. Thank you. Don't know why I couldn't come to mind, but part of me comes to that. But I think that some of these throws that we've seen from him, as great as they've been, there could have been a little bit some better placement. I mean, some of the throws were a little bit behind receivers, and there was one, I think it was a slant to Tim Patrick, that he threw it really behind Tim Patrick, and if he let him, Tim Patrick would have been not off to the races, but he would have picked up quite a few more yards. And part of the reason for that is that he just threw off a weird base. So setting his feet, making these throws with a good base will definitely help him out with the placement, and that's, with him specifically, that is the next big step I want to see. Reading the defense better, not making those same kind of misreads with the interceptions, and planning and better feet, better placement, and better placement.
Definitely, I can agree with that, and I do feel like I mentioned earlier that there is going to be a game coming up, whether it be this year or the next, with Drew Lock trusting his arm a bit much, making the wrong read, and game gets out of hand quickly. I mean, kind of like this Texans game for Houston. You know, it's all of a sudden 14-0, and you're like, oh my gosh, we're 5 minutes into the game. We're 10 minutes into the game. What happened? And, you know, Drew Lock, give him credits. A lot of very tough throws in there, but comes in the nature of the gunslinger. Sometimes it's going to go the other way. So I'm curious to see if that's going to happen and how he and the team responds. Because sometimes, you know, you love that quick memory and, you know, that closer mentality where if you make a mistake, you got to go back out there. But on the other hand, you don't want to be like Jameis Winston, where it almost is like, does the interception bother the guy? You know, like, is he learning from this, or is he just going to continue to go out there and give the ball to the other team? So something to watch for going forward, because there was a few throws. Obviously, the results were brilliant, but there were a few throws out there where a better secondary or potentially a better pass rush, I mean, no J.J. Watt for them, might have resulted in some balls not only being intercepted, but going the other way for 6. So definitely going to watch for that. Anything else that comes to mind you want to look for with Lock going forward? Something that you've really been impressed with that you weren't expecting, or that something that you did not expect to be something that you wanted him to improve on, whether it's because he's farther along than you thought or something new cropping up?
One thing that has shocked me watching him is that he hasn't made as many rookie quarterback mistakes as I was expecting. Like, just making bad throws. I mean, well, his placement hasn't been the best. And the 2 interceptions there's only been a handful of really bad rookie errors from Drew Lock over these 2 starts, when typically it's 10, 15 plays for a rookie quarterback that you're seeing. I mean, I think in the Chargers game, I counted like 6. And in this game, I haven't really broken it down just yet for it. But I think when I'm looking over it, I can remember like 4, maybe 5. So there's just not that many. And that is something that's very shocking to me because I wasn't the highest on him pre-draft. And so seeing him not make those mistakes is fascinating in a way because I expected them to come.
Yeah. So I guess we've been talking a lot of Drew Lock here. Before our next break, who needs to step up on the defense? I mean, obviously the defense has been the best part of this team for years and years, but defensive changes happening, a lot of injuries on the defense too. That's going to change how it looks, how they can attack. But over these last 3 games, who needs to step up within defense and who are you looking for to step up? And what adjustments are you looking for coaching wise?
This is actually a tough one of who to step up because part of me wants to go with edge because I want to see Jeremiah Tauchu continue to step up. I want to see Justin Hollins. I want to see Malik Reed get back to how he was at the beginning of the season because he's really fallen off of recent weeks. Justin Hollins is starting to get hot. So I want to see them step up. But I also want to see the defensive line. These guys that are under contract for next year in particular. I haven't seen anything about Draymond Jones and his injury, but DeMarcus Walker, he's still under contract. I want to see him step up because with Adam Gotsis, Shelby Harris, and Derek Wolfe all set to be unrestricted free agents, and Mike Purcell is a restricted free agent. Having any of those guys step up is going to be a huge boost for the Broncos going into next year and provides them options of what they want to do or could do with these defensive linemen this offseason.
Yeah, defensive line is definitely something that is an area that I'm a little bit concerned about the future of this team. And it's not the best, in my opinion, at least where I'm at studying this class. I don't think it's the best interior defensive line class. So we'll be interesting to see how they attack that and how these guys on there look. Draymond Jones has a high ankle sprain. Fangio said today he could play this week. He could miss a few weeks. They're not sure on the severity yet, so the swelling is going to need to go down. I would assume that we're not going to see him for Kansas City if it's so swollen that they're not sure if he's going to play this week. But we'll see. That's definitely a bummer because he was playing decently here down the stretch, and they definitely need him. So too bad, but definitely. I guess I want to see some of these young guys. I want to see more Yadam. I want to see the safeties continue to keep it up, and also I want to see if these linebackers can at least hold serve with how they're playing so far.
I want to see Justin Simmons get his contract extension. That's what I really want to see.
It's December. That's typically if they're going to do those kind of things, they tend to happen in December. So hopefully we'll see that soon. He's playing great level, and we didn't even talk about him in the stock report, but it's because his stock is already so high, honestly. But he had a phenomenal game as well.
It's bad that I think he was really good against the Texans, but his game was a little bit disappointing just because it wasn't quite to that level that we've come to expect. And part of me feels really bad for that.
Yeah. I mean, keep playing great, and those standards are going to be that high. So it's worth it. Pay the man. Chris Harris Jr. probably walking either way, but that money that you're going to create with him walking is probably, you need to just transfer that over as soon as possible. You can't let that guy out the door. He's been too good. And not only that, he's taken up a leadership mantle as well. So there's something really to be said about that. So one more break. We will be right back, folks. Don't go anywhere.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
And we are back on the Building the Broncos podcast. I am Nick Kendell, joined today by Erick Trickel. Eric, we're going to look at this core of this team right now. Obviously, there's still season left, but we always have a forward-thinking vantage point on this podcast since it is Building the Broncos, and we're going to look at this core, this offense, and the defense going forward, not just, the next 10 years, but a little bit more limited than that. So the next 3 seasons, so 2020 to 2022 core, and I listed some guys here. And first, before we get to this, I do want to bring up Daniel Jeremiah's championship roster checklist that he likes to have. So his checklist, he has 1 quarterback, yes or no, obviously.
Yeah.
3 offensive weapons, yes or no. 3 offensive linemen, yes or no. Obviously, they need more than 3 offensive linemen, but this is, again, just the building blocks.
Yeah.
And then he had 2 pass rushers and then 3 back 7 players. That's where he was at currently. Daniel Jeremiah obviously moved the Sticks podcast, scout for the Ravens for years, now one of the higher-ups for NFL Network. So I have this Broncos core written out as followed so far for the 20 to 2022. Maybe a couple of these guys won't be there beyond then, but I think this is a pretty safe core for those next 3 seasons overall. So quarterback, I would say yes for now. Obviously, we need to see more. He's going to be given next season. I think at this point, unless he totally implodes down the stretch, I think Drew Lock 2020 is probably the safest bet you're going to get. So quarterback, I'm going to say yes, but it's in pencil, obviously, because it's long term. But hopefully Drew Lock, potentially the quarterback there. And hey, 20 to 2022 is when his rookie contract is going to be over. So definitely worth it there. Courtland Sutton, that's an obvious yes for me. Probably one of the most valuable players on this team. Didn't have a great week last week, but has absolutely emerged. I mean, he's a dog. Tight end Noah Fant, it's another weapon there that I think, with how they're featuring him, the jump that I'm expecting him to take this next season as well, I think he's definitely a guy. Phillip Lindsay, I put as a yes here. Obviously, I think he's going to have a contract renewed in that time period, but I think he's one that you have to write down in the lease for this team as being a guy. Now, is he more of a complimentary running back? Maybe, but so many teams do running back by committees these days anyway that I'm not too worried about it. And then only one offensive line piece written down as a core guy, Dalton Reisner. He's been playing pretty solid this season. It hasn't been obviously Quentin Nelson level-esque, but I think you're pretty darn happy having him on this team, setting him somewhere on the lineup, feeling good about it for the next 3 seasons at the least. So I guess now talking about the offense, is there anybody here that I am missing that you would make a case for?
No, just because, in my opinion, I don't think this offense is all that talented. I think what talent that they do have, you have listed. I mean, Brandon Allen, backup quarterback. I mean, you're not going to include a backup quarterback as part of the core anyways. I think Royce Freeman has been a failure this year for the Broncos. I mean, has been failing the Broncos this year. I shouldn't say he's been a failure. I don't trust any of the receivers to be a true number 2 or even number 3 weapon just yet. I mean, Tim Patrick, he did have a good game against the Houston Texans. He did have a good game against the Minnesota Vikings. But he's just so similar in play style to Courtland Sutton, not overly dynamic, that I wouldn't say that he's part of the core. I think he's a very good depth piece to have. No other tight end. And offensive line, I mean, the only one who is really a for sure building block is Dalton Reisner. Garrett Bowles can't be trusted. Connor McGovern, it all depends on what he gets. I'm not a guy who's going to want to pay him big money with his contract up this year. He hasn't been that great. Right guard is a complete mystery right now. And Jawan James, he can't stay healthy. So on offense, there really isn't anybody else, in my opinion, that could even be considered to be added. Yeah,
I agree with you. The only one maybe due to, I think you have 3 maybes on the offensive line with Bowles, James, and McGovern, but you can't really put anything besides a maybe there, so I wouldn't call them a core at all. Those guys are all replaceable, the ones that you're looking to replace over the next 3 seasons. And if you do retain them, you don't want them to be the core. You want them to rather be one of those auxiliary guys that you put around the core, so to speak. So offensive line, obviously, better quarterback play, Mike Munchak there. You're feeling better about it going forward than you have in a long time, but still, you probably want some pillars to set there on the offense. So now on to the defense here. I have both edge rushers, Von Miller and Bradley Chubb, listed on here. Who knows about the longevity of Von Miller? That's definitely something to question there, but I think he's safe to list here for now where we stand at this vantage point. Bradley Chubb, obviously. Alexander Johnson I've written down here as well. He's not for being, what is he, second year in the NFL, he's not a spring pup, so to speak, because of the case that he had he was acquitted on. But I think he's definitely a guy I would list as a core piece going forward. Obviously you want to have a bigger sample size, and maybe down the stretch, he's not a true 5-tool linebacker. He's not Devin White running around out there who's been playing phenomenally over this last month for the Buccaneers. But I think he's a guy you can be more than happy with listing as a core piece on that spot. Not a all-pro linebacker, but a guy who might make a Pro Bowl. And then both safeties. I mean, Kareem Jackson older, but I don't know. He's playing so good, I wanted to put him on here. And then Justin Simmons, obviously. He's the most obvious one on this defense along with Bradley Chubb. Those 2 guys, obviously pay Justin Simmons. You got to pay him, but I think he's the most obvious one. So same question to you. Are all these guys ones that you agree belong, and is there anybody missing?
I agree they all belong. And as for people missing, this is a little bit tougher on the defensive side of the ball because with one guy in particular, Draymond Jones, and his usage. I think that he is definitely in the plans to be part of the core, and he can bring that interior pressure, but we just haven't seen enough of him to make me quite comfortable putting him on there. But I definitely want to, because that is their intentions, to have him be part of their core. There's no corner that really stands out as a guy to be the part of the core. Not yet, despite seeing some improvement with Isaac Adams' game. Devontae Bosby hasn't shown enough. Devontae Harris and Duke Dawson, both of them have really fallen off a cliff after, I think it was the Browns game, that just they've been picked on a little bit. So there's no one there. And linebacker Todd Davis, he is what he is, but you're not going to get much more than that. Josie Jewell, I just don't think that he's got a bright future ahead of him. His lack of athleticism is really showing up in the NFL.
He's at his best spot right now.
Yeah, he is. He's a solid depth piece that can provide good special teams coverage, but that's not a core guy. So there really isn't anybody else on the core. I mean, Bradley Chubb, even though he's on injured reserve, he is a premier pass rusher, and it just sucks that he got hurt, because I think he was going to have a really good year, and this defense would be even better if he was still out there.
Yeah, definitely a bummer, but hey, it's going to be like adding another top 10 pick to this defense next year. So, all right. So you agree with all these guys. Not only am I missing anybody, but you don't think I put somebody in here who doesn't belong.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. So I guess now that we have our offense here, and it breaks it down really easily, 5-5 here. So we have, according to this checklist, a maybe yes with Drew Lock. They do have the 3 weapons, although I would argue that Phillip Lindsay's borderline enough where you probably want to add another supplementary wide receiver if possible. You need more offensive line for sure. And then on defense, I mean, as it's listed, you wouldn't meet Daniel Jeremiah's checklist, but you're missing Bradley Chubb right now. And obviously some questions on the defensive line, and especially cornerback. So I guess looking at this and how it's particularly with the core, not looking, just next season, what they could add, but particularly with the core, what is the biggest offensive need for this team?
I think the biggest offensive need, as much as I think that they could really do with adding another dynamic, speedy, basically versatile threat at wide receiver, or another tight end to really complement Noah Fant, even though I do think Jeff Hireman's solid there, I do think he can be upgraded. I think the obvious one is offensive line. They have only one core piece on their offensive line. They need to have 3. There's 4 positions that are basically, 3 positions that are basically up for grabs after the season, with left tackle, center, and right guard. And who knows how long we're going to have Juwan James for next year. So it's just, there's so many issues there, and their depth is even worse somehow than their starting unit. It's just a huge mess that's got to be cleaned up.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously with System and Munchak and a little bit more of a mobility and getting rid of the ball with Locke, you can kind of somewhat circumvent the issues in the offensive line. But on paper, it's still an area that they're going to need to address, whether that be round 1 free agency, although that can get pretty expensive, and just maybe even a shotgun approach with a good number of picks. But it's an area that on paper is the one that's probably you feel the least good about as far as team building goes. On defense, though, same question. What is the biggest defensive need?
I think they definitely got to get that. It's another tough one, because I really want to say corner. They definitely got to solve their corner, basically their whole secondary, because as great as the safeties are, they can only do so much, and having those corners can definitely help. But for me, the biggest need is I want a true disruptor on that defensive line. I want a guy that's going to sit there and demand a double team, because with Bradley Chubb and Von Miller on the outside, it is going to give offensive lines nightmares. And having a true disruptor along with those 2 edge rushers can help cover up a little bit with the issues in the secondary and provide them more time. So for me, as much as I want to say corner, I definitely think that it's another true disruptor on that defensive line that can blow up the run and get after the quarterback.
Yeah, and I do want to point out, historically with Fangio-built defenses, he can find guys, even a safety. Granted, we're going to be talking about paying 2 safeties here a good amount of money for this 2020 version of the Broncos, but he can find guys, and Donatel, but they've been able to find guys at safety and cornerback, bodies that fit what they need. Yeah, free agency, cheap, late in the draft, undrafted free agency even. They can find those guys and put them in there, and they get pretty good production. But he's historically relied on high-valued assets, and let's call them as they are, blue-chip players, in the front seven. Whether that be Patrick Willis, Roquan Smith, Akeem Hicks is a guy that came along here. They spent, obviously, Aldon Smith when he was the 49ers, Khalil Mack. I mean, just the list of front seven talent. Justin Smith, Aldon Smith, just so much usage of resources in the front seven on blue chip players. So I think that is probably, while we're very much looking at cornerback from the 1 foot aerial view, very close to the situation, cornerback needs to be addressed. I wouldn't be surprised if they were using more valued resources on those front seven guys, because typically they've been able to scheme the back 4 or 5 or 6, depending on what it is, and be fine there. But they just rely on that certain level of talent level, that threshold of talent with those front seven players in the Fangio defenses historically. Now, granted, this is his own team now. The league has changed over the last 10 years, granted, let alone his entire career as a coach in the NFL. But it's just kind of an observation. It makes you wonder. And yeah, I think it plays into what you're saying as far as that true defensive line piece that this team could use. So I guess now that we know this list here, the core here, who are your favorite 3 guys that the Broncos could add this offseason that would really supplement this core that are potentially realistic? The Broncos picking anywhere from, let's say 6 to 15 at this point. So
just the draft, not free agents or anything like that. Just draft. So obviously one of the offensive tackles, I don't care which one really. I have 5 tackles that right now sit in my top 25. And I really like this tackle class, but if I had my pick of any one of those guys, I definitely would want Tristan Wirfs. I think that just what he would bring to the table, he'd solidify the left tackle position. Definitely can use some coaching, but he seems to want to be better. And I think pairing him with Mike Munchak is definitely going to be great for his future if the Broncos make that happen. And then later on, I would love to see a guy like a wide receiver like Brennan Ayuk from Arizona State. That he's that weapon that they really could have that to open everything up on the offense and just brings that speedy threat. I would like to see him be a little bit better of a route runner, which I guess in a way I wouldn't mind like Denzel Mims. Like, there's just so many receivers actually that it's hard to pick just like one guy. And then another guy that I would really like to see be brought in is Cesar Ruiz from Michigan, that center. I really like his movement ability, and he's got good size to him for being a center in the NFL. I think he can work in the scheme. And basically if they were able to land Wirfs, Reisner, and Ruiz, they would have their left tackle to center all figured out and just a good building block. And then they can start working on that right side. They have ideas with the right side with Juwan James. They're going to be possibly trying out Elijah Wilkinson. They have Austin Schlottman as well. Maybe they bring back Connor McGovern and decide they want to move him back to guard. Who knows? But those are 3 guys sitting throughout the draft, not necessarily early on, but just like an early, a middle, and a later round guy potentially that I would definitely be looking at for the Broncos.
I really do like Cesar Ruiz for Michigan. He played some guard as well. I think he was a 4-star prospect. And I think this Michigan offensive line, because of the scheme change that we saw at Michigan this year from more of that classic pro-style offense under Jim Harbaugh to more of the Gaddis air raid spread concepts where they're throwing around the yard, it took a little bit for the offensive line to gel to that new scheme. And that includes not only Ruiz, but their left guard, Ben Brederson, I believe I'm saying that right, is another guy. But that'll be interesting to
and Michael
follow those guys.
Their right guard. Yes. I think I really like him as well.
Yeah, so solid guys there. Michigan does a good job of recruiting offensive linemen. Not always the best developers, but they're pretty good there. And on defense, I guess any guys that really you think would be interesting to add to this core. Because, I mean, right now, looking at this, there's 2 spots for offensive line, obviously. There's probably a spot for another wide receiver, but it's not as apparent. I guess it depends on more of your long-term view on Lindsey. Defense looks okay, but they could really use it's either defensive tackle or cornerback.
So for me, if I'm looking to add to this defense, one guy early on that I absolutely love I love the player. I love the prospect. He reminds me of Chris Jones with the Kansas City Chiefs when he was coming out of Mississippi State. But that's Javon Kinlaw. Long, athletic, good power. And I think that with the development, with working with Bill Kohler in this defense, he could really develop and be a major disruptor on the interior of the defensive line. Marvin Wilson out of Florida State. He's a big boy. He could possibly play the Akeem Hicks role. And one guy that's really flying under the radar, I've been watching him a lot over this last weekend, and he's a big sleeper for me, and that's Delly Harding of Illinois. I know you and we've talked about him privately a little bit, but I've been watching his tape. I love the way he moves. Very smooth mover, just against the run and in coverage. There are some issues when he gets blockers on him, which you typically happen with linebackers that are around 230 pounds, if not lighter. And I think that if the Broncos, and especially Vic Fangio, if he wants an athletic linebacker piece who can cover and move sideline to sideline, very similarly to Roquan Smith out of Georgia, who the Bears drafted, this is the guy that I'm looking for. I think pairing him next to Alexander Johnson would be tremendous for this defense.
Man, I thought for sure you were going to say your guy James Lynch.
I really thought about it, but I think that this is a guy who, James Lynch, another guy that's flying on the radar. Part of me thinks that he won't declare this year, despite having 10 and a half sacks. He's an underclassman. I think that he'll return and try to come out next year, and hopefully is able to build on this and really help himself.
Alrighty, well, I think that's going to wrap up today's episode of Building the Broncos podcast, powered by Overtime Media. You can find Eric on Twitter at Erick Trickel and myself at Kendell MHH. Make sure you head on over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. Head on over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and a comment, as your support can help us continue to bring you our Denver Bronco deep dives. You can follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to the Huddle Up podcast wherever you listen to your shows. You can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Eric, I'm Nick, wrapping up another episode of the Building the Broncos podcast. We hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon. Go Broncos.
You've been listening to Building the Broncos. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.